A king who came to the woods to die, laughing in the light of his own miracle. That is the image House of the Dragon leaves burning in your eyes. But the ending you watched is not the ending the episode chose, because the show spends its true final minute on a much quieter fire. And what you likely missed is that the two scenes are answering each other. 7 episodes into Season 3, Ryan Condal's Fire and Blood adaptation has been arguing that dragons and the people who ride them are tools, and the dragon in winter is the hour the tools start getting priced. So hold both fires in your head and answer the only question that matters. Is Aegon's last stand the rebirth of a king, or the final break of a broken man? A burned, hunted king orders his own execution in a dark forest, and by the end of the scene, the executioners are the ones lying in ash. That is the ending House of the Dragon hands Aegon II, and then the show does something ruthless with it. Picture the setup. Aegon, scarred from head to foot, is running for a ship to Braavos when soldiers claiming the woods for Queen Rhaenyra surround his campfire. Instead of kneeling, he stands, names himself the true heir of Viserys and the rightful king of the Andals and the First Men, and dares them to strike him down. Then he whispers one name, Sunfire, and the darkness behind him grows teeth. The dragon that fell with him at Rook's Rest incinerates the column, and Aegon spreads his arms in the firelight, laughing like a man who has either found his god or lost the last thing tethering him to earth. And the episode still refuses to end there. It ends on Ormond Hightower sharing ale with Ulf the Dragonseed, offering him Driftmark and the title Lord of the Tides, a seat he can only promise because its lord sits hostage at his own table, while Ulf smiles and agrees that their enemies will soon burn. So the real question is double-barreled. Is Aegon's stand the rebirth of a king, or the final break of a broken man? And why does the show believe a quiet purchase deserves the last word over a miracle? To read that clearing correctly, you need to know that Aegon spent this entire episode resigning from his own kingship, and he was not the only Green doing it. The last time he and Sunfire faced fire together was Rook's Rest in Season 2. When Alicent told Aegon his only duty was to do nothing, he flew off to prove her wrong, and his brother Aemond ordered Vhagar to burn king and dragon out of the sky together. This episode finally says that quiet part out loud. Aemond confesses to Alicent that he tried to kill his brother. If you ever filed Rook's Rest under the fog of war, the show just reopened the record and stamped it fratricide. Attempted. Alicent's answer begins in the courtyard, kneeling over her murdered protector with his dagger in hand. Her eyes land instead on the nightshade, flowering beside the body, the same plant Helena called Death for you or me 2 episodes ago. So the cup of spiced wine she carries to Aemond is a mother's ritual with the garden folded into it, and by night's end the prince stumbles into the chamber of Alice Rivers and drops at her feet, earning only the word idiot as a eulogy. The crown itself has already moved on too. At Tumbleton it is young Daeron, the brother the Greens treat as their king now that Aegon is presumed dead, who tells Gwaine Hightower he has no fear of insignificance and that Rhaenyra may keep her crown for all he cares. Aegon's own plan is not a counterattack either. It is a boat to Braavos, and the smallest life a Targaryen has ever wished for. Meanwhile, the episode is teaching you its vocabulary at other tables. Ormond Hightower boasts of a piece on the board that will bring Rhaenyra to her knees. And when Daeron hears that Corlys Velaryon sits hostage at Ormond's dinners, he guesses out loud that the old admiral is the piece. Out in the Vale, Baela says the theme in plain words. Rhaenyra treats people as tools to be wielded. And the hour opens with Rhaenyra herself demanding prophecy from Helena, commanding her as queen to confirm that she will prevail, and getting nothing back but a gray mare. By the end, Helena receives an answer no one commanded, a labor, a dream of Dreamfire, burning a crowd in the dragon pit, and a quiet field going dark under an eclipse as snow begins to fall, the winter this episode is named for. Everyone in this hour begs for a sign. Keep count of who actually receives one. Now watch the ending with your eyes, because the staging is doing half the arguing. When fleeing peasants warn that Lord Mouton's host, sworn to Rhaenyra, is marching their way, Tywin Lannister proposes shelter behind the thick walls of Rook's Rest, which means the only refuge left in Westeros for Aegon is the exact ground where his brother burned him. Aegon refuses to be trapped like a fox in a hole and declares, out loud and on screen, that he will make his stand, be buried as a king with his dragon, and not let the history say he was slain in ignominy by his own brother. Larys Strong talks the party onward and pay attention to how. He pleads that his body makes him useless in a fight, and that his duty is to see King Aegon remembered, his heroic last hours immortalized through story and song. Mark the exit though, because the man who writes King's stories chooses not to be in this one, and the episode has a colder author waiting in the wings. By nightfall, Larys has peeled away, and it is Aegon and Tywin alone at the fire, when torchlight starts moving between the trees. The commander recognizes Tywin, jokes that he will die with his ears still attached if he gives up the crown's gold, and Aegon rises anyway. What follows is not a battle speech, it is a liturgy. Heir of Viserys, king of the Andals and the First Men, the light of the Seven, the stranger's retribution, the warrior's judgment, dreadful in vengeance, righteous and glorious. He is reciting kingship like scripture at his own funeral, and then he whispers, "Sunfire breathes Dracarys," and the forest turns white. The camera gives you both readings in a single shot, arms spread, face contorted, a scream that is agony and triumph in the same breath. Then comes the cut that decides the episode. Not to armies, not to Rhaenyra, but to a smaller fire, where Ormond Hightower pours ale for Ulf, retells how Daemon publicly struck him in the street, and assures him that Rhaenyra and her ilk regard him as a tool to be used and reprimanded, the exact wound Baela had already named. One more detail sharpens the deal. Back in King's Landing, Ser Alan is handed a small box holding a severed finger and a signet ring. No letter, no name, after Ormond had ended his dinner with the captive Corlys by picking up a fruit knife and saying, "Before you go." So the hour's last image is not the dragon. It is a bought man's dark smile and a promise that their enemies will soon burn. 3 readings of that clearing are on the table, and they do not weigh the same. Reading 1 says the stand is a genuine rebirth. Aegon chooses to die a king, and Sunfire's return rewards his faith. Its best evidence is right there on screen. He plants himself in the light of the Seven, claims his name and his titles, and the knight answers with the one creature that never betrayed him. The show stages it as a prayer that lands. But the same screen also shows a man who had already handed the crown away in conversation, who was mid-flight to Braavos, and who stands only after the road is gone. A rebirth needs a man who wants the throne back, and the episode gave us a man who wanted a boat. Reading 2 says it is a suicide that failed. Aegon staged a death worth writing down, and the laughter over the ashes belongs to a man with nothing left to lose. On screen, that case is strong. He says in plain words that he would rather be buried as a king than run, and at the fire he does not fight, he dares them to strike him down, which is not tactics, it is authorship. What the episode implies pushes it further. The laugh reads as a punchline at his own expense, a man who ordered his execution and was handed a legend instead, the only answered prayer in an hour full of people begging for signs. Where this reading falls short is the word failed, because the aftermath on screen is not a corpse or a humiliation. It is power, and Aegon visibly receives it. Reading 3 says the stand decides nothing, because Ormond Hightower has been playing a different board all along. While both his kings resign, he grooms Rhaenyra's most resentful dragonseed across repeated meetings and closes the deal with Corlys Velaryon's seat. The first half of that is simply on screen, and the editing supplies the implication. The show cuts straight from the king's inferno to the recruiter's campfire and asks you to notice which fire moves the war. The strong version, that the piece on the board was all from the start and the Corlys dinner was misdirection, is informed speculation. The episode never says it in so many words, but Ormond announced his piece hours before this meeting, and a hostage admiral cannot burn a city. And for the book readers, Fire and Blood is a history stitched together decades later, from witnesses who contradict each other, Grand Maester Munken's dry court record, Septon Eustace's pieties, Mushroom's gutter gossip, So when Larys says his duty is preserving a king through story and song, that is not a courtier's excuse, it is a job description, and the show knows you know it. Here is the verdict. The break comes first, and the rebirth is real only because of it. Aegon becomes a king in the exact moment he stops auditioning for the job, not for the mother whose advice to do nothing goaded him into the sky at Rook's. Rest not for the brother who burned him, not for the histories. At Rook's Rest he flew to prove he mattered, and his own family answered with fire. In this forest he stands because nothing matters anymore, and the dragon that fell with him rises out of the dark to say otherwise. Criston Cole made a stand like this 2 episodes ago, and it was surrender wearing glory's armor. Aegon's begins as exactly the same thing, and the difference is not courage or redemption. The difference is that Sunfire said yes. So the laughter over the ashes belongs to both men at once. The broken one who ordered his own execution, and the king who just watched the world finally obey him. And the episode ends on Ormond buying Ulf because the show insists you keep score correctly. The hour opens with a queen commanding a prophet to promise her victory, and it closes with the man everyone wrote off as a madman, quietly pricing a dragon in real estate. Driftmark for a resentful commoner, promised while its true lord sits hostage at Ormond's own table, and a severed finger arrives in King's Landing to prove the vacancy is being arranged. Aegon's fire is the spectacle. Ormond's fire is the plot. The Green's 2 fixers understand the same market. Broken kings and insulted dragon riders are both cheapest at the exact moment they feel priceless. Book readers have treated Ulf as a lit fuse since the Red Sowing, and this scene just measured the length of it. I will not say more than that. Daeron and Gwaine spent the hour guessing at their commander's piece on the board. The finale shows it pouring ale on a night watch wearing the queen's colors. That is the cold arithmetic of the dragon in winter. A reborn king is still only a piece, and the final scene belongs to the player who just moved a dragon onto his side of the board. 2 fires then, one that turned a fugitive back into a king, and one that quietly put a price on everything the first fire won. The episode's literal last words belong to that second fire. They will laugh at you no more, Ormond promises, and Ulf smiles into his cup and answers, no, they will burn. That is the real verdict on Aegon's miracle. The show grants him his resurrection, and then, in the very next scene, shows you how cheaply a resurrection can be outflanked. Aegon stopped running, and the world finally obeyed him, and whether that makes him a king or a monster is exactly the wound this war keeps reopening. Because the truth is that he is both at once, a broken man who ordered his own death, and a rightful king the fire refused, and Westeros has never known what to do with men like that. So cast your vote in the poll, rightful king or broken monster. And keep one eye on the man pouring the ale, because the episode just told you which fire to watch when the season ends next week. Make sure to subscribe so you never miss our deep dive into the latest episode of House of the Dragon. Do you think Alicent truly meant the poison to kill Aemond, or was she counting on Alice to save him?